Hello? Oh, I know. What? I was gonna say somebody's watching you, but no, that's creepy. Somebody's overseeing you? That still does not work. I'm not going there. Okay, that's true. All right, friends, welcome to volunteer training. We have one more session left after this, and then it'll be just in time for 2021. Yay! Well, we have holidays, but um, before we get started, I want to say thank you for coming back and joining us. It's really been nice and I won't speak on Murray's behalf, but I know that for myself, it's been very nice to have you all here, to have a little bit more of the feeling of the Sharlot Hall Museum up and running. These are small steps we're taking, but I am just glad we're taking them. So, it's very exciting to have you all here. So today we will be welcoming Mick Woodcock again, and as you can tell, he will be talking about what I usually refer to as the outer buildings of the campus. These buildings, I believe you all are familiar with them, but they are up on the upper part of the campus, sort of ringing around near the gate. They are buildings that don't have interpreters in them, but have very helpful and important information when you're talking about the history of pioneer settler Arizona and the frontier period, the territorial period. So please use that handout to make any notes that you need. As always, please do ask any questions that you might have or that might come up, and we'll go from there. Next week, Murray and I will be doing an Engaging the Visitor session, and we will open it up by providing a tour of the campus to you guys. So we'll be splitting you into two groups, and we'll be going around, and it'll be a combination of a tour and some refresher information. So please do make sure that you have a jacket or a sweater, a scarf, whatever you might need, because we will be going outside between the buildings. And we will start at the regular time of 8:30 or close to it. And then after the tour, we'll be heading back in here and doing a little bit of an engagement and working with visitors session. So that will close out our volunteer training for 2020. It's exciting to say that we can at least close out the volunteer training for 2020. And I know that a couple weeks ago I had one of you ask me about joining next year's training session classes. You are always welcome to join the training sessions classes. In fact, we encourage current volunteers to come back and refresh their memory. because every year there might be a little bit of new information about a building, about a person, that adds to your understanding of the history of this area and ultimately will add to the visitor's understanding of the history of this area. So please do take advantage of refreshing your knowledge because that is why we're here. So at this point, I'm gonna, real quick, make sure that you have signed in, please. And I know that a lot of you had already had donuts and coffee, but as always, you can always count on me to say this. Feel free to keep eating. So, thank you all for being here. We're gonna welcome Mick up and we're gonna get started with Fort Misery, school, and ranch houses. Oh, I don't need glasses, guys.
Thank you, Jenny. So thanks to Ken, we have an improved format here so that you can see everything and it fills the screen. Thank you, Ken. So as Jenny said, these are what we refer to as the outbuildings because they are out and they are log structures. And when I came to work here, they had exhibits in them. So there were artifacts, leather, cloth, paper, wood that were being exposed to temperature fluctuations, humidity fluctuations. And so over the years, we've moved those to better climate conditions. But we've turned these buildings into living history structures, which I think would, were Charlotte able to weigh in, she'd approve. Because much of what we're doing is trying to bring history to life. So there are panels in the buildings. When there are no interpreters, we also now have sound. So we've got an audio component as well. So let's get started. So Fort Misery, here it is in all its glory with John Howard, its main occupant, right there. This was down on South Montezuma Street. I'm not at all sure who all of these folks are, but nice dog. So it was originally built by a man named Manuel Irizarry from Albuquerque. The Irizarry family was a trader family. They brought stuff in from Mexico back east, gathered from around New Mexico, and they had basically a general store. But when they found out the governor's party was coming and that there'd been golds found here, they put together a wagon train and they brought goods to sell. So as the only real established structure in the area, it had the first term of court in the territory held there, the first Protestant church services, and the survey of the town site started from there. And before the building was even built, Bishop Lammy from Santa Fe held Christmas Mass there. So it's a fairly historic site, and we'll get to how come we have the building. But after Manuel got rid of the building, it went to Mary DeCrow, later married Cornelius Ramos. She's here, one of the original people in Prescott, got the building from Manuel, used it as a boarding house. Boarding back then was just meals, so so she lived in the back room, fed everybody in the front room. Her claim to fame was she had goats, so goat's milk for the boarders' coffee. So John Howard winds up with the building. He comes to Prescott with the governor's party in 1864, gets the building from Mary and also South Montezuma Street from her and Cornelius, and has Sam Miller move the building to his property because the thing was, shall we say, falling apart. When it was originally built, had a flat roof that was just pine poles with dirt on top of it. And if you don't do some serious maintenance, why, in the winter of, I think 1868, it rained real hard, and pretty soon the dirt on the outside was mud on the inside. And so the Arizona Miner had an article that said that Judge Howard had spiked his guns and left Fort Misery. So that's when he had it moved. So there's John in his early days, kind of a good-looking guy. He was born in England in 1820, moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan with his father after 1830. He and I think 3 of his brothers, and so he's the postmaster of Ann Arbor. He and his brother ran the first newspaper, and they both studied law. Back in those days, there were only a few law schools, and to be an attorney, you found a judge that would actually give you access to his law library, and you just read and memorized stuff. So as originally, and this is Prescott in 1867, I believe, already kind of a substantial community. It has a few buildings anyway. So he arrives in 1864, helps organize the first 4th of July celebration, although he's not here for the celebration. He's gone down to La Paz for the first term of court, hoping that he's going to get some action, and there's no business to be done. And he runs for the legislature unsuccessfully, not just once, but several times. He's a lawyer by trade. One of the first people admitted to the territorial bar. Mid-years, this, I'm not sure how John got to California, but this photo was taken in California. Early to mid-1870s, he's appointed territorial fish commissioner. This is something not well known, but Arizona had a fish commission, and John at one time was the fish commissioner. But his big claim to fame was he collected local history. Unfortunately, something happened to the collection, and I'll tell you about that. But in his later years, here's John, and he's 6 times elected mayor of Prescott. They're 1-year terms. And the interesting thing about being mayor of Prescott, it had no salary. And so it was something you did for the community. Same thing with the fish commissioner. It had no salary to it. But one time a couple of guys came to see John Howard as mayor, and he diligently listened to their proposal, and he said, you know what? I believe so much in what you're telling me, I'd be glad to invest a year's salary as mayor of Prescott in your scheme. He had a sense of humor. So in 1892, he marries Flora Darby. Flora Darby from Converse, Indiana. Till I don't know how she got out here, but she's in her 50s, John's in his 70s. And so he moves from the cabin, moves to a house in Prescott, takes his collection with him, and unfortunately, the house burns. So all of John's collection is lost. So in his declining years, like he's 79 years old, I'm getting close to that, so I'm not sure how declining it was, but anyway, he and Flora moved back to Converse, and he dies there in 1903. And this is Hezekiah Brooks, longtime friend and legal associate, and can't tell you who she is, but she's not married to him and apparently not related to him either. Cabin ownership. So John sells to a lady named Mary Mills in 1897. She sells it to F.J. Pettit. F.J. Pettit sells it to J.A. Pettit, and it kind of stays in the Pettit family until Charlotte acquires it. And they're going to widen Montezuma Street. This is in the 1930s, and they say, look at it, look, this place looks terrible, and it does. And they said, we're just going to tear it down. We're going to widen Montezuma Street, blah, blah, blah. Charlotte says, no, you're not. She gets the building donated to the museum, gets the Civil Works Administration to photograph the outside of the structure, mark the logs, take the cabin apart, and move. Notice it says usable logs. That becomes a problem later on. Usable logs to the museum grounds. Whoops. Hi. So one of the CWA photos, you'll notice the log markings. Unfortunately, whoever reproduced this photograph for me did it backwards, and so it should say W3E, but it says E morph W. And this is the back of the building. It's got two doors and a set of windows which weren't there originally. They say, how do you know that? We have photos. This is the front of the building. You'll notice that the front door is you can barely see it, only the top three logs show. This plays into when I say only the usable logs, because over the years they'd graded Montezuma Street and it had come up on the building, and the logs were not in real good shape. So the logs sit here at the museum for a while. A Works Progress Administration grant helped to get the building put back together starting in 1936. So old logs were used to replace ones that were not brought to the museum. My. So when things get back together, they're not put back together right. And I don't know why, because there are photographs, and the CWA folks also did drawings of the buildings, marked the logs. In fact, if you want to go look at Fort Misery, you can still see some of the faint paint on them. So getting it back together shouldn't have been any big deal, but there's the finished product. Hi, Charlotte, Miss Sharlot Hall. Somebody said, oh, well, this is an original window, but it's not. And then there's a door, and then who knows what's going on here. And they imagined this fireplace because somebody had taken the stones off the original. So this thing is good for Charlotte's purposes, but over the years, it had some indignities. This is a Arizona wild grapevine that used to grow here. We had flower beds up against it, lawn on the other side. And here it is. We installed a wood-burning stove because we were using this as a living history place, mostly for school projects, school tours. And so this was after we had taken the artifacts out of it. So we're looking at the Gurley Street side. Somebody had imagined some windows over here too. And this is actually the original front of the building. You know, we had seen the front door and only the top of it. Well, they just put windows in, and then they used these logs from some older cabin, and they were by the 1990s in really poor condition, in fact. This sill log here is in pretty bad shape, and you can notice they've had to do crew joining to them. These are the top three logs on the original front. So we got serious dry rot and a snail. The roof was not in particularly good condition either, and we don't, under the presumption it was the roof Sharlot had put on it, but I'm not positive about that. So after much agonizing and discussing things with the director at the time, we decided we were going to put it back to the original. In fact, we got a Arizona State Parks grant to do that. And we had photographs, we had, of course, the drawings by the CWA, so we felt we could do this and turn it into a living history structure. I have no idea who this lady is. This is a file photo, but there she is. And the great thing about this is it shows the front door. So we can see it's got glass and a wooden door, and it's got a white knob. And got a pretty good look at the fireplace here too. Probably taken in the 1890s after John Howard is out of it. So log repair. We had to find out what state of the art was because we wanted to salvage all of the original building that we could. So we literally are scabbing ends onto logs to salvage them. There was only that much left of an original. We built it back out. We had to put ends on a couple of the front. You'll notice here that how degraded this is, termite damage, dry rot damage. That's the third log down on the front where the dirt was graded up on it. So, lots of original logs, and we're looking at these things and we're saying, what is that? Because these saw marks are straight up and down, basically. And then over here, we've got some that are broadaxe faced. So we finally figured out that what these guys brought with them was a pit saw, and that they had actually felled trees and cut them in half. So we said, hey, we can't reproduce a building without doing that. So here's Cody Bennett, and he's retired from the museum, but he's on the top. He's what they refer to as the tiller man. His job is to pull the saw up, keep the cut straight. That's all his job is, and you can see he's keeping the wedges, the cut open. It's the guy in the bottom who is the engine for this. Literally, he cuts on the downstroke, pulls up, cut, pulls up, cut. The British, who studied just about everything, were concerned about alcoholism in the country. This, I think, is in the 1850s, and so they do a survey of people's jobs and what they do and what the correlation is to the percentage of alcoholism. Turns out Sawyers, these guys, are at the top, have the highest rate of alcoholism of any profession or trade in Great Britain. And I can see why, because I did some of that. It's really, 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 really hard work. So, Fort Miseries logs were originally just set on the ground. We decided we had to have a foundation airspace. We wanted to make it last. So we did concrete blocks faced with native stone. And I think if you go out there, it just goes away. You don't even notice that they're there. So here, we took the building apart, and Bob Fields, who was head of building maintenance at the time, said, once we get this thing apart, I'm afraid we won't get back together again. I said, no, just take it apart. We'll get back together. And so, What happened as soon as we started putting things back together, the door openings appeared where they were supposed to. Fancy that. You know, when you building back the way it was supposed to be, everything looks right. So you can see we reproduced some logs, did the inner partition wall, which Sharlot had left off. Well, no, she didn't leave it off. She used those logs to repair stuff on the building, so they're still there. They're just not in the right place, and we decided we'd just replace those, and then did these. They're broad axe faced on the outside like the originals were. And you can see we studied the pitch of the roof and everything we could from the photos. And as I said, it all works out. There's the front door, 2 back doors. I'll show you the photo with the back doors, but there it is. Everything works, everything fits together just like it was built that way. So we're taking a look at the interior. There's our rendition of the door in the photo. Of course, we kind of had to imagine the fireplace, but I think the guys did a pretty good job. This is what would have been the south wall. It's our west wall. You'll notice all this white stuff. I think that that's some kind of glue or paste. My thought is that originally this had canvas over it. It had newspaper as wallpaper, or it might have just been papered on there without the canvas. So we turned it on, did a lot of work on a furnishing plan. Anybody wants to see the furnishing plan, you can see it, but it's based on photographs. It's based on writing about people that went to have supper with John Howard, and it's just based on, you know, well, what would we need? What should it look like? We know it had a couple of beds, so there's John's corner, his washstand. Everybody needs a washstand. His traveling gear, shooting bag, hat and a coat. There, we know he had a guest bed. Frontier Hospitality said if somebody came by, he gave him a meal and a place to sleep. There's his desk. A lot of the judge's activity is done at his table, so writing, et cetera, trunk to store things in. This is actually based on an original Prescott trunk that has, when you lift the lid, it's got, whoever owned it wrote where they came from and all the stops and everything, and it wound up in Prescott. So, and it's, I think, originally from Sweden maybe, or Denmark. Gotta wash the dishes, and this was our only actual living history structure for a number of years where we did programming. So we cooked in the fireplace, did our dishes, did our foodways programming in here. And you can see it draws fairly well. Got our frying pan and different things here. So moving on to the ranch house. The ranch house and Fort Misery and the Hartzell Room, or the Sharlot Hall building, are all kind of being built at the same time. Sharlot knew Grace Sparks. Grace Sparks was the administrator of the Works Project Administration grants in the area. She worked with Grace to write these grants to get these buildings built. Her idea was this was going to be a tribute to local ranchers, and it was going to house her ranching collection. And so you can see this is probably taken, I don't know, maybe in the 1950s. It's got a long gone flagpole. I had never seen that. And it's just kind of the ranch house. So here it is under construction. As I said, built with Works Progress Administration funding in 1936. And there's the flagpole, and you can see. And the guys that built this, they might have known what they were doing, and they might not have. This is a kind of a simple structure. Come back here. Okay, these are what they refer to as saddle notch. So that is the simplest thing, is just cutting a dip out in both of the logs and just dropping them in. If you look at Fort Misery and the governor's mansion, they're half dovetail, guys that actually knew what they were doing about building construction, log building construction. But hey, this is the 1930s, so who knows about log building construction? You got young guys, they don't know anything. And housing the collection. Here it is. There's the collection. Branding irons, lots of branding irons. We've got bits, spurs, stuff, cabinets full of things. And it was just kind of all in there, not exactly like this. Somebody had built a rack for the branding irons, but basically her collection lived in there from 1936, 37 to into the 90s. So, just like Fort Misery, it was in need of a little help, because this sill log, literally you could stand inside and look outside. That's how gone this log is. And it says several logs needed to be replaced. I think we replaced 2. Roof needed replacing, and that's I think actually the second or third roof, but there were some really big cracks and stuff missing and whatnot. So it was in need of help. So here again, restoration of the building. The director at the time said, well, you know, we could move the pop machine in there. Literally, we had a pop machine that sat out in front of the Sharlot Hall building. Lawler Center. Well, it was a Sharlot Hall building back then, but no, I'm sorry, the museum center. It was moved around, but anyway, we finally convinced him it needed to be a living history structure. So there's Bob Fields. We're about to get started. You can see the first thing was to get the daubing / chinking out from between the logs. And then we stabilized the structure. We literally bolted the walls together. Just kind of lifted it up, and there it was. So, replacing of logs. We've got this one replaced. You can see the end of it here. Looking good. That was pretty easy to do. Not so easy on other stuff. We had to replace an east end log. This is number 3. I don't know how many guys it took to lift that thing, but there were a lot of us, and it was really heavy. Don't want to do that again. And then we had to replace the window frames and the windows. They were pretty badly degraded. And then finally, we needed to get rid of the bugs, because log buildings attract bugs. It's a constant fight to keep things from eating our log buildings. Governor's Mansion is just a big smorgasbord to certain things like termites and death watch beetles and stuff like that. So we had it fumigated. So when they tented it, they fumigated it, took the tent off, and they said, well, that takes care of what's in there, good luck. because the thing is, it killed what's in there, but something could walk in the next 5 minutes. There's no residual protection, so we're just constantly after stuff. So new life for an old cabin, thanks to a grant from the John and Helen Lawler Trust. We were able to restore the building and purchase furnishings for it. So much of the, we were trying to reproduce an 1870 ranch house. A lot of furniture was built by volunteers. Most of it using pieces in the collection, not everything, but most of it we tried to replicate what we knew was here. The smaller furnishing pieces were purchased. Some small objects were made at the museum, but all of this tin and the ceramics were made at other museums across the country. Schoolhouse. Well, the theory is that S.C. Rogers built the schoolhouse because that's what he said wrote to his granddaughter. This is taken, oh gosh, it's long ceased to be a schoolhouse. There was actually a fireplace on the back side of this. It's got a door, a couple of windows, which you can see on the current one are there. This has been added, and then of course there's a built-on in the back. And this is a rental. In fact, it might have been a couple of people living here. So, the cost, $1,800, it says. That's a lot of money back then. I don't know why it cost that, but that's what it said. In 1870, it was known as the Prescott Normal School. The Normal School was kind of an equivalent to high school today. It was a normal school was supposed to prepare you for a teaching career. Whether Rogers was actually doing that or not, I don't know. But it didn't stay, and the thing is, this is not public school. This is a subscription. In fact, Rogers in 1870 he's running a school and another guy is running a school. They're both having terms of school at the same time and having a lot of students. So there isn't a real public school until later, and that's another story. But once Rogers turns loose of it, then it changes hands, it's a residence, it's added on to, made into apartments, and finally sold to the school district for $10. And then they moved it from where it was to make an athletic equipment shed out of it. So this is after 1906. You can see it's been apartmentized. It's got another door back here. It's got a flue here. Probably there's a couple of stoves on the inside that hook into that. So, replication, the original burns in 1948. Apparently it had ceased to be used as an equipment shed and was standing so that transients could get into it, and they apparently inadvertently set it on fire, but that's not the first time something like that's happened in the community. So the replica was dedicated in 1962, as you can see, funding provided by the Prescott Rotary and the Prescott Education Association. And there they are for a photo op. So refurnishing, the original museum use was open storage for school-related objects. So we had school desks, we had just about anything you could jam in there, jammed in there. As again, I mentioned earlier, no environmental controls, artifacts subject to damage and theft. We lost a ruler. Someone found a way to stick something way in, hook it off, and work it out. it was a curiosity shop type of exhibit and not compatible with modern museum practices. So the new look, we re-roofed it a few years ago. And we've actually never really done any exterior work on it. This is the original daubing. Haven't replaced any of the logs. But we did install exhibit panels, and we installed some what I refer to as schoolhouse furniture, benches. And for documentation, here's Miss Sharlot at the, I think this is the Dewey School. She went there a short amount of time. You can see one-room schoolhouse, really skinny. But our documentation is based on Thomas Jefferson Arnold, teacher, and so he talks about teaching in Skull Valley in the 1890s. So another shot of our panels. We've got a couple of artifacts that are semi-indestructible. The teacher's platform, unfortunately, when I was doing research, I missed the fact that this is the fireplace end of the building. So at some point, we're going to want to turn things around, but I haven't done that. There's the wash stand and the obligatory fire extinguisher. So those are the buildings. I want to talk a little bit about bringing history to life, because we do that on the second Saturday of every month. We've got a core of volunteers that like to dress up in funny clothes. This is Troy Groves. He's our printer, so you'll find him in the printing office. He's currently out in front of the ranch house for this shot. Inside the ranch house, we cook delectable delicacies, or at least good home-cooked food. I haven't had anybody actually complain, really complain. Well, that's not true. They weren't fond of the potato pie, but everything else we've cooked seems to be good, and we use original recipes, and some of the stuff is actually out of local cookbooks. So we've got our cast iron range and youth interpreters. We do living history out at Fort Whipple Museum when it's open. So this is what I refer to as a pioneer living area. This is where we do summer programming, outdoor cooking. We cook, bake, do all that kind of stuff. So what is living history? You know, you probably have an idea of what you think it is, but what I like to say is it's an educational tool that employs an accurately costumed individual to deliver a predetermined historical message to an audience. And by predetermined historical message, I mean something that's been researched, not something you would have to memorize, but it's based on solid historical research and not something somebody's, oh, well, if I don't know the answer, I'll make something up. People do that, believe it or not. Moving right along. Education. So you can read this. I think that being able to look at somebody who is a living artifact, so they've got the clothing is right, the accessories are right, everything is right, they're in the right kind of setting, it really helps people get a better grasp of history. It's something that I love. Exhibits. Exhibits can't do that. I love photographs. Photographs can't do it. Looking at objects can't do it. But if you can put them all together and animate them, then you've got something. So our interpreters are providing an in-depth understanding of an object, process, or event, and they breathe life into something that would otherwise be a static exhibit. If you walk into the ranch house this morning, it's got some furniture, it's got the audio, it's got the panels, but when our people are in there, we put out all the stuff to make it the ranch house. And then the interpreters can tell you what's going on. Entertainment, are we allowed to entertain? I hope so. People should have a good time while they're at the museum. That's my philosophy anyway. Not that we water down history, but there's a lot of fun stuff, and education should be fun. It should be learning with an enjoyable component. So actually being there is better than being in an exhibit. This is why we have places like Colonial Williamsburg, Plymouth Plantation, Old Sturbridge Village. So we've done living history at Folk Arts Fair, and laundry. We'll be doing laundry next year. This is a pretty old photograph. These young women are really, she's graduated college and married, so. But nevertheless, you can see this is the way we wash our clothes. And you've noticed there are young people in our program. We have youth interpreters. There's a young lady sitting here in the schoolhouse. And the Fort Whipple Museum, we do military stuff. But ladies have a component to that too. So, and there we are. So, questions? Questions, no questions. Everybody's mesmerized, lobotomized. You need to be energized. Well, thank you all very much. I encourage you to go look at these buildings on your own time. We're not going to take a tour of them, although I understand next week maybe you'll stop by and say hi to our log structures. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mick.
You're welcome.
So we will plan on going by the buildings next week. We won't be spending a lot of time at those structures, but we are planning on going through and sharing a little bit of information about them, which will be familiar because of this presentation here. So hopefully this presentation gave you all a sense of how the buildings are used, even though they're a lot smaller than some of our more centrally located buildings. They serve some pretty important purposes. As Mick was referencing, the value that a lot of tour groups get, and I'm going to speak to the tour program real quick for a minute, is that it gives you the environmental understanding of what a house would have looked like, what the family environment could have been like, what school would have been like. And that's a different kind of value than being able to hear it from an interpreter necessarily. And during living history, it's able to be amplified in an even different, even more significant way, with the interpreters talking about the environment, talking about what would have happened to make those delicious meals come to life, talking about what school would have been like. So the buildings are some of our outer buildings, and they do get overlooked by our visitors in terms of if they're running late for lunch and they're like, you know, I'm really hungry and maybe I'm not going to stop at Fort Misery. But there's value in those structures. So as a volunteer in any of the buildings, whether you're in the governor's mansion, in the Sharlot Hall building, at the Lawler desk, wherever you're going to be, still encourage visitors to look at those buildings because they also help tell the story. And you heard about some of those stories in this presentation today. So, any last questions about, at least for now, about the structures for Mick, or any questions in general? Yeah. They're regular hours. The living history program that's part of it seems like it pretty much goes from 10 to 3. You usually find the interpreters wrapped up by 3 o'clock. Any other questions? Did you have? I thought I saw your hand go like this. Yeah? For for Fort Misery? I'm having a little trouble understanding the question because are you talking about the Fort Misery building or when it was boarding house or okay. So if it's a part, you also, if you see Mick and you have found the question and sort of feel free to ask him too, because he might know it a little bit better than I do. Any other questions? Yeah? Mick?
Basically lists a few things that he's collected. But, you know, much of it's conjecture. It's kind of general in saying he's collected a lot of historical items, and then he mentions a chair a guy has made and a couple of other things.
Do we have any of that material?
No, because it burned up.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Thank you. All right. Anything else? No? You're all inspired by these buildings? I like how 3 of you are just like, oh. All right. So So next week we are going to be finishing up. We'll be meeting here at 8:30. Murray and I will be dividing you guys into 2 different groups, and we'll be going through the buildings. If there's any specific questions you have about the buildings that you've accumulated, you've thought of, make sure that you bring those questions up to Murray or myself. As always, we'll do the best that we can to answer with the relevant historical knowledge that we have. And if we don't have the answers, it'll just give us more things to look up. So, the endless historical